When violent deaths strike a quiet mountain village, an old legend about a deadly creature comes back to life. Get ready to relive the adventure as we recap the story of horror and crime film today. The Soul Eater, production year 2024. The story begins with Frank, a soldier in the army, who is approached by someone who offers Frank something important. Frank is trying to get to Washington. On the way, he gets off the bus and tries to get into another car. Meanwhile, Elizabeth, a police officer, is in her car. While driving, she comes across a roadblock caused by an overturned lumber truck. After inquiring, Elizabeth learned that it would take about 30 minutes to clear the road. As she was returning to her car, Frank approached her and asked for a ride. He explained that he was a soldier heading to Washington. After initially hesitating, Elizabeth eventually agreed to let him ride with her, as they were both headed in the same direction. Upon arrival, Elizabeth enters the house to begin her investigation, while Frank heads toward the garage, where a white truck is parked. As he searches the truck, he finds a wooden toy and puts it in his pocket. Elizabeth enters the house and is horrified by the horrific scene before her. She finds the mutilated bodies of the husband and wife, their stomachs and mouths torn open, and their bodies covered with countless knife wounds. A police officer tells her that the couple have a son named Evan, who has been missing since the incident. Despite their efforts, they have been unable to locate him. Elizabeth notices a door downstairs. Upon going down, she discovers that it is Evan, the missing boy. In a state of terror and trembling, Evan reveals that he is hiding from someone he calls the Soul Eater. She comforts Evan and takes him outside, placing him under medical observation to ensure his safety. At night, Elizabeth and Frank sit down to discuss the case. Frank shows Elizabeth photos of several children who have disappeared in the area. He explains that no one knows where these children have disappeared to or what happened to them. Elizabeth, determined to solve the case, suggests that they work together. Elizabeth then heads to the police station, angry at the officers for staying inside the house for so long but failing to find Evan. Martin defends the team, explaining that they were understaffed, preventing them from fully focusing on the child. Meanwhile, Frank visits the hospital to talk to Evan. He meets with Dr. Maria, who tells him that Evan is in no condition to talk. He is just a child and he is in shock. This could cause him even more shock. Frank reluctantly agrees and leaves but sneaks into Evan's room. Frank approaches Evan gently, asking him who killed his parents. When Evan remains silent, he says, "You just have to answer yes or no." Frank pulls out pictures of missing children and shows them to Evan. "You know these children?" Evan nods his head yes. Frank asks, "That night when your parents died, was there someone else in the house?" Evan's voice trembles as he whispers, "It was a soul eater." At that moment, Evan's eyes widen in horror. He sees the shadowy shape of the soul eater looming behind Frank, a shape that only Evan can see. Before Frank can respond, Dr. Maria enters the room and firmly orders him to leave, putting an end to the conversation. Later, Elizabeth watches the autopsy of Evan's parents. The doctor makes a shocking revelation. The couple killed each other. The husband killed his wife before committing suicide. Elizabeth is stunned. How could someone do such a thing? Frank approaches one of Evan's neighbors. He asks her about Evan's parents, hoping to gather evidence. The woman reveals that Evan's parents are related and from the same family, but there was something very disturbing about Evan. "He could see spirits," she says with a trembling voice. "I even think he might have killed my dog." Frank opens the photos of the missing children and begins to show them to the woman. Just as she is about to say something, her husband walks in and doesn't understand what is happening. He believes that Frank is flirting with his wife, which angers him, leading to a heated argument and fight. Frank doesn't want things to get worse and chooses to walk away and return to Evan's house. When Frank enters the house, he finds Elizabeth already there, doing her own research. Together they head to Evan's room, only to discover that the computer that was there has disappeared. This raises more questions about what Evan might be hiding or who might have stolen the computer. Elizabeth then takes Frank downstairs. They find a bed. It turns out that Evan did not sleep in the room upstairs. He lived downstairs. While investigating, Elizabeth receives a phone call. She finds a pile of wood and a large suitcase underneath it. She calls Frank, who finds the bag containing a dead dog. Frank realizes it is the same dog that belonged to the woman. Frank and Elizabeth continue their investigation by visiting a lumber mill, where they learn that a worker recently committed suicide. Frank notices that the man had drunk beer before his death. This raises questions: how could someone kill themselves by drinking beer? While searching the mill, Elizabeth finds a wooden toy. They meet David, the person who reported the worker's death to the police. David explains that the deceased worker was supposed to deliver the goods to him. When they arrived, they found him dead. After questioning him, Frank and Elizabeth release him, but something strange happens. They notice that the mill's computer is also missing. They hear voices from above. A man tries to escape. Frank immediately pursues the man, chasing him into the woods. Frank eventually catches up with him, but in the struggle, Frank accidentally falls and is injured, allowing the man to escape. However, the man drops his bag during the chase. Frank finds the laptop that was missing from the mill. He informs Elizabeth that the man escaped. That night, Frank checks the hard drive and discovers that many files have been deleted. Determined to recover the data, he contacts his friend Cortez, and Frank sends the hard drive to Cortez, asking him to recover the files, track down IP addresses, and uncover any hidden locations associated with the data. Frank then joins Elizabeth for a conversation. She reviews the call log and notices that David never called or texted the deceased worker. This revelation proves that David lied to them, raising serious suspicions about his involvement in the case. We go to David, who is seen praying with his wife. As David drinks, he suddenly begins to feel uneasy, as if something is wrong. Frank and Elizabeth arrive at David's house at night to confront him. Elizabeth enters through the front door while Frank sneaks in from behind. When Elizabeth enters, she is horrified to find David's wife severely injured, lying on the floor. She calls Frank for help, but at that moment, David attacks Frank with a gun. As David is about to deliver a fatal blow to Frank, Elizabeth intervenes, shooting David in the back and saving Frank's life. As Elizabeth searches the house, she discovers that David has a daughter named Gina. She enters Gina's room and finds disturbing drawings of a soul eater. Outside, Gina is seen running away from the house. However, someone follows her and captures her, leaving her fate uncertain. At the hospital, Evan is seen lying in bed at night. Suddenly, he hears a voice and his door opens, which he slams shut, revealing a mysterious figure of a soul eater. He takes control of Evan and takes him outside. The next morning, Dr. Maria tells Frank and Elizabeth the disturbing news about Evan. She explains that Evan has somehow disappeared just like the other missing children. Elizabeth reveals that Gina, David's daughter, is also missing. Hearing Gina's name, Maria remembers that Gina and Evan went to the same school. "Sometimes when I visit the school, I see them together," she says, hinting at a possible connection between them. Elizabeth receives a call from the police station. She decides to head there immediately, taking Frank with her. On the way, a motorcyclist chases their car. He starts shooting at their car. In an attempt to stop him, Elizabeth crashes her car into the motorcyclist, causing him to fall and injure himself. The collision also results in a minor accident for Frank and Elizabeth. The motorcyclist flees into the woods. Frank decides to follow him. He soon finds him too badly injured to escape. Frank interrogates him, demanding to know the whereabouts of the missing children. The man insists that he knows nothing about the children, claiming that he was just there to deliver drugs. Frank searches his pockets and finds the drugs. Frank presses him for more information, but before the man can answer, he dies from his injuries. Next, we see that Elizabeth's condition has worsened due to the car accident. She is admitted to the hospital for treatment. Meanwhile, Frank receives a call from Cortez, who reveals that the files are linked to a dark website that hosts disturbing content, including child pornography and torture videos. He also tells Frank that the site has 4 owners and provides their names. Additionally, Cortez tracks down the site's IP address and sends it to Frank. Frank prepares to investigate the site on his own, but Elizabeth, despite her injuries, insists that she join him. Frank reluctantly agrees and they set off together. They arrive at an abandoned asylum. As Frank and Elizabeth enter the building, Elizabeth meets Martin while searching. Martin claims that he was sent to look for missing children, and Elizabeth trusts him as a fellow officer. However, Martin suddenly attacks Elizabeth. He says, "You shouldn't have come here." As he is about to strike, Elizabeth quickly moves in and shoots him, saving herself. As Frank searches Martin's body, he discovers a key hanging around his neck, the door that Martin was guarding. Frank and Elizabeth enter. They find themselves in a room filled with strange objects, a series of rooms that seem to be designed specifically for children. They eventually reach the last door. When they open it, they find Gina and Evan chained inside. Gina begs them to leave immediately, warning that the soul eater is coming. When Gina is asked about her parents, she reveals the horrific truth. She explains that the only way to weaken or satiate the soul eater is through the salty tears of suffering people. The soul eater was using Gina and Evan to satiate its hunger. Gina recounts how she discovered a mysterious powder in the woods, near a dead animal. To test its effects, she fed it to a neighbor's dog, who then died. Evan mixed the same powder into his parents' breakfast, causing them to lose control and attack each other. Gina used the powder on her father, mixed it into his wine, and mixed it into the beer of a lumber mill worker who committed suicide. The powder was a synthetic drug, which drove its victims insane and self-destructive. Suddenly, the power goes out and Gina warns of the Soul Eater's arrival. Frank, realizing the danger, turns his gun on Elizabeth and insists that she stay with the children. He locks her in the room with Gina and Evan and goes to confront the Soul Eater. However, Frank is ambushed and electrocuted by an unseen assailant. Meanwhile, Elizabeth manages to break the chains and free the children. She shoots the door lock and escapes the room with Gina and Evan. She finds Frank sitting, being held at gunpoint by a mysterious figure. When the figure speaks, Frank realizes that it is a woman. He shows her a photo, and she reveals that he came here in search of his missing son, who has also disappeared. He manages to electrocute her. The woman, who turns out to be Dr. Maria, Evan's doctor. Frank demands answers, and Maria coldly explains that she and her colleagues have been torturing children for profit, posting videos of their suffering on the dark web. When Frank asks about his son, Maria reveals the horrific truth. He did not survive more than a week. He was brutally tortured, and a video of his suffering was posted online. Frank becomes enraged and attacks Maria, disarming her. Elizabeth demands to know where the other children are, and Maria leads them to a red door. However, when they open it, they find all of the children, including Frank's son, dead. Overwhelmed with grief and anger, Frank is about to shoot Maria when Gina and Evan intervene. They force Maria to take the same synthetic drug she used to manipulate others. Frank places a knife in front of Maria and leaves the room, allowing the drug to take effect. As hallucinations and madness set in, Maria grabs the knife and begins to kill herself. Frank hears her screams and sets the entire building on fire. Elizabeth, Gina, and Evan watch from a distance as the asylum burns. Frank now knows he will never get his son back. He leaves the place behind while Elizabeth takes Gina and Evan to a safe place, determined to give them a chance at a new life. And showing this story ends here. Appreciate a subscribe and please remember to like. Thanks for watching.